Hi, everyone. This is Andy from the Million Cat Challenge team. I'm here to introduce you to our wonderful speakers and to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join this webinar. We're lucky today to have with us Bryn Rogers and Mike Kiley of the MSPCA. Before we begin, we'd like to thank Maddie's Fund for hosting this webinar and for making the Million Cat Challenge possible through their generosity. One other little bit of housekeeping, we're reserving the last, 15 to 30 minutes or so for Bryn and Mike to answer any questions that may come up during the presentation. You can submit questions as they arise during the webinar using the Q&A box that's in the left-hand column. Please send us questions as they occur to you, since we never know whether we'll have enough time to answer all the questions, and sometimes we don't have time at the for questions that are asked at the last minute. If something comes up that you'd like to ask about, go ahead and type it in right away and we'll queue it up. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kate to introduce our presenters.
Thanks so much, Andy. This is Kate, and it's my honor to introduce our great presenters today. Mike Kiley is the director of the Noble Family Animal Care and Adoption Center for the MSPCA at Nevins Farm, which is a super fun place to visit if you're ever out that way. He's been working in animal welfare since 1994, all at the Nevins Farm. As director at the MSPCA for over 12 years, he has orchestrated the adoption and outreach programs at one of New England's largest and busiest animal welfare organizations. And our other presenter today is Bryn Conklin Rogers, the program manager at the MSPCA Boston Adoption Center, and she's been with the MSPCA since 2007. She started in the advocacy department before transitioning to work in the adoption center. She manages the adoption center's events as well as the foster care and volunteer programs. And she works on spay-neuter programs and adoption programs at the Boston MSPCA. Bryn, her husband, and beautiful daughter Violet live with a very special cat named Freddie. And just before the webinar started, I asked her what made Freddie so special, and she started listing so many quirks and defects that we don't have time to go through them all, but I thought it was wonderful, just the loving way that she described all the ways that Freddie is special. And I first learned about the changes that this team had made at the MSPCA probably about a year ago when Bryn generously sent me an email describing in detail the change and some of the impacts that it had had. And I made slides out of it, and I started with a slide that said, easy win. And then I had another slide that said win-win, because it impacted two things in a positive way. And then I had another slide that said win-win-win. And then another slide that said win-win-win-win, and another win. So really impressed by all the good things that have come out of what is potentially a pretty accessible change for a lot of organizations, and also the really thoughtful way that this group has gone about making the change, communicating the change, and then putting that together so that all the rest of us can learn to do something similar in our own organizations. So thank you so much, Mike and Bryn. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hurley, for that introduction. Mike and I are really excited to share our organization's story with you all today. And we're big fans of the Million Cat Challenge and the platform you've created through both your Yahoo group and the webinars, which challenge us all to look at the policies and programs we have in place and make sure we're doing our best and doing right by the at-risk cats in our communities. And I need to personally thank you as well, because I listen to the webinars often on my hour commute to the adoption center, so they keep me entertained and keep me thinking instead of having road rage. So you introduced us, but I wanted to introduce you to the MSPCA as an organization. So we are the second oldest humane society in the country. We were founded in 1868. We are a private 501c3 nonprofit organization. And what makes the MSPCA unique is that we're really involved in every facet of animal care and welfare. So we have 4 adoption centers whose work we'll be focusing on today. But we also have 3 nonprofit animal medical centers. So we have the one here in Boston, which we're speaking from you today. And Angel is a 24-hour emergency hospital. It's also a specialty hospital. So we have vets here that specialize in oncology, ophthalmology, dermatology. And so that's really nice to have next door to your animal shelter. I think we all can realize why. We get a lot of medical cases in, and having experts in the field next door is really has a great impact for us. But it also is a 24-hour emergency center, like I said, so in some ways it makes us a 24-hour adoption center. We do take in strays and bottle babies at all odd hours of the night. So it does present some challenges as well. And then we have another animal medical center in Waltham, which is 30 minutes west of the city, which is also an emergency hospital. And then we also just opened a nonprofit clinic within the Neshoba Valley Technical High School. So that's north of the city. And there they provide basic animal care as well as low-cost vaccinations and spay-neuter. And then we also have an advocacy department, which works on promoting humane legislation in our state and also nationally. And then we have our law enforcement department, which consists of trained police officers who are enforced with investigating animal cruelty issues in the state. So we are a unique organization, and today we're mostly going to be focusing on the work that we do in our 3 adoption centers. So we have 3 locations, but technically 4 adoption centers. So we have our adoption center here in Boston, which is on the right side of your screen. In the middle, you'll see our Methuen location. Methuen's about an hour north of Boston. And then we have the Cape Cod Animal Shelter. Our Methuen location is actually 2 adoption centers in one. We have our companion animal adoption center, but then we also have Nevins Farm, which houses and places farm animals for adoption. So horses, pigs, goats, sheep, roosters, you name it. So those are our 4 adoption centers. And though we're located in different areas and have unique populations, we're all facing the same issue, which is our big cat issue. So back around 2008, we were receiving a large number of animals, cat surrenders, both stray and owner surrender, to the point where we felt really unable to manage those cats successfully. So on average, we were receiving about 21 cats a day at our locations. And actually in New England, we really are most busy in our summer period. So we call it sort of our kitten season, runs from about May to November. So it's actually higher than that number, as generally during those months we're receiving double the amounts we were in the winter. So some days we'd be having 50 cats come to us in one day. And I can remember I started back in 2009, and I remember vividly being in the back of our adoption center, putting together dog crates, scrambling at the end of the night. It must have been 7 o'clock at night when we used to close at 6 then. And assembling dog crates because we had just taken in 6 more cats from one house and we didn't have anywhere to put them. And at the time, the adoption counselor was just holding all the cages in the back and crying. She was so upset, and she was one of the people I looked up to the most at the shelter. And so those vivid memories stick with you and make you so happy of where we've gotten today. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today. But the slide there is just a slide of the intake numbers that we had from 2008 to 2010. And you can see there's not much changing. So maybe a couple hundred cats less in 2010, but it was remaining, steadily high. And really our intake was driving our euthanasia. So our euthanasia numbers were also high for cats from 2008 to 2010. And so we knew we wanted to do something, but we were so busy taking in the animals, trying to find places to put them. We were still being creative. We had about 1/4 of our cat population going into our foster program. We worked to do things like our kitten happy hours, where we extend our hours at certain times, and brought our foster kittens all back at the same time so they wouldn't take up spots on our adoption center. But ultimately, we were seeing the same number of cats coming in and adopting out about the same number and euthanizing the same number. So we took a step back and wanted to say, okay, what do we need to do to make things better for the cats? And so finding solutions, we're really going to talk about the 3 stages that we went through and the small changes that we made at each point to try to give you some things that you might be able to take home with you in your adoption centers. So there are larger things, but smaller things that you can tweeze out of each one. So the first stage was really just to focus on getting the cats into homes. So we need to increase adoptions. We need to move more quickly through our population so we can take more animals in. And once we were able to do that, we started focusing on reducing intake. And then after that, we really got to a third stage we didn't know we'd get to, which is, okay, how do we place these cats that we've never placed before? What homes do we need to be looking for? How can we market these cats? So we're going to go through each stage with you now, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike for the first small change, what we thought was a small change that made ruffled some internal feathers and then led us further down the line.
So the very first thing that we needed to do was figure out how do we increase our adoptions. And before we really got organized on that, one of the things we started to realize is that we were shooting ourselves in our own foot. And what I mean by that is that we were an open admission shelter, which means we never turn anybody away. And we took that really seriously, and it really meant that anytime someone needed to surrender an animal, we were available for that. And it became a culture that actually really wasn't something that we could continue to support. And the biggest issue was our weekends. So on our weekend hours, when we're open Saturdays and Sundays, we would basically open the doors and we would have a line of surrenders through our lobby, and our entire staff would be transitioned over to taking in animals. And we would watch what would happen, which is we would struggle to get all these animals taken in and set up, and we would have maybe one or two people available to actually do adoptions. We had a lot of animals at the time for adoption, so there was a lot of interest, but we had a line of people waiting at our front counter with adoption applications, and we had to basically make them wait and wait and wait to the point where they just got frustrated and they left. And we were really focused on making sure that the surrender people had a shorter wait, because when they got frustrated, they might leave and dump the animal somewhere, which was our greatest fear. So we were operating primarily out of a fear-based approach to our plan. And one day we just sort of threw up our arms and we said, we can't spend our entire day taking in animals on the days that we have the best opportunity to get animals adopted. So we need to make some sort of change. And ultimately that looked like, starting at one location in Methuen, we stopped taking animals on the weekends, and we kindly let people know that we have surrender hours. We made them available throughout the week. And when people showed up on weekends after we had changed, we politely asked them if they could come back so that we could keep our staff available for adoptions. And some people would, and that was great. And other people said absolutely not, and we would still take those animals in. So we still lived our mission of open and admission, and we didn't turn anybody away that really needed help, but we did start to filter them into hours that would be more manageable for us. And in fact, it worked great. It made us a little bit more strategic, where we could try to take the animals in during the week, get them adoption ready by the weekend, and potentially out the door. So it really did work. And when we really thought back at it, we were really operating this culture where you would watch our staff if there was somebody that came before hours to surrender, or we were worried about them surrendering. We would run out the door, track them down, and invite them in off hours to surrender their animal. But if somebody knocked on the front door and said to us, we would like to adopt your most senior cat, we would close the door in their face and say, come back during adoption hours. So we were doing it to adopters, but not to surrenders, and we needed to flip that switch. So we instructed staff to politely ask surrenders to come back during our surrender hours, and if someone happens to knock on the door and say, we'd like to adopt a cat, let them in, and we'll figure it out from there. It seemed like a simple change, and we thought there wasn't really going to be much of a pushback. But where we do operate a law enforcement division, that was actually our very first pushback. Our law enforcement agents were really worried that we closed our surrender hours on the weekends, because they were directing people there to surrender animals, and they didn't want any barriers to that process. So we did have a lot of back and forth, but we held steady. We weathered that storm, and now it's just how we do business. People call, and they may get frustrated that we don't have hours on the weekends, but we explain to them why that is, and we let them know it's a serious decision to surrender an animal, and it may mean that you have to take a day off of work or leave work a little bit early, and most people get that. In the case of emergencies, we still take those animals in and don't turn them away. So we moved that, and that actually made a big difference for our adoptions. We were able to send more animals home on the weekend. We were able to filter our resources for personnel towards surrenders during the week, and we were able to even sometimes make staff available to us that were specifically just available for adoption, and not have to have them worry about taking in surrenders. So we were able to have some of our best adoption counselors work the weekends for us. From there, we tried to take it another step further. So we created a team of people we recognized that the very first thing that we needed to do when we were swimming in animals, swimming in cats, as Bryn described, we would take our entire day of just figuring out where cats had to go. We spent all morning long cleaning cat cages. And in fact, when people would leave our staff, when they would quit, we would ask them what the biggest reason that they were leaving. And the top two reasons were that they couldn't deal with the euthanasia of cats anymore to the level that we were dealing with it. And they also were sick and tired of cleaning cat cage after cleaning a cat cage and having no end in sight to where our problem was. So we said, we need to do something else. And we created a team of people that could look at this and say, how do we move to the next stage of getting more animals into homes? So we created a team that wasn't just all the managers and all the directors, because those people have very few hours available to meet together. And we decided that we would approach it from a different angle. So we invited people from our PR department, our development team, some of our adoption managers, and any key decision makers that we thought could help this plan. And basically, we also united some of our savvy donors. For animal welfare, so much was focused on dogs for so long that some of the cat donors sort of felt a little bit left out. We started to realize that we had some great cat donors that were trying to help, and they were actually going to senior centers to try to get senior cats adopted. They were trying to help us with some medical issues so that we would avoid euthanasia for cats that needed more. But they were not feeling appreciated, and we actually dubbed them the catadvocates. We invited them to be part of that process, and that they, what they do for us is that they are fully aware of our mission, our approach, and what we want to do. And what they do is raise money for us so that we have the resources necessary to do the next steps. And they didn't necessarily want to dictate exactly how things were done, but they wanted to make sure that we were as well-funded as possible so that we could continue our mission and try to adopt out more animals.
So the first task that that team worked on was, again, getting more cats into homes more quickly. And we had been to a lot of conferences, had been talking to our neighbor adoption centers, and had learned about the positive impacts, the big impacts that fee-waived events had. And so Mike and I were determined to make them happen, but I think just as many of you maybe in your adoption centers have found, it's hard to create change sometimes, and people are worried. And so the biggest hurdles that we faced might be hurdles that you faced as well. One of them being funding. So we tried to sell them with the cats will be with us for a shorter amount of time, so we won't be spending as much money on them. But that didn't work. So we knew we needed to fund it, and that's where those catadvocates, without them, none of this would have been possible. So we were able to raise money through really 4 of our major donors, talking to other donors, and getting them to understand that their money will directly go to saving a life, to paying an adoption fee, and that was really sexy to donors. So it worked out really well. So we surpassed that first hurdle of raising enough funds to say, okay, we'll cover the costs of the adoption fees through those funds. But we still had that pill to swallow of like, wait, you're giving away cats for free. That feels like it's devaluing cats. And we don't want to do that. Cats are amazing. So to work on that, we said, okay, I see what you mean. How about we just discount the adoptions and see how it goes? If it goes well, if the people that are coming in and adopting are, still valuing the cats just as much and seem like great homes for the cats, if our return rates don't go up, then we can revisit the fee waived. And that's what we did. So the first event I think we did in 2010, we called it SPF 75. And it was in our summer months. And we discounted the fee to $75. Now, that's still pretty high when we look at some of the other adoption fees, but our fee was normally $150, so it was a significant discount for us. And we had some success. So when we compared the adoptions from years past to that weekend adoption, I think we actually did it for a week, it was higher. And the biggest thing that we found is that the people coming in weren't people looking for a discount, but were people who had been thinking about getting a cat for a long time, heard about this event on the media, and wanted to help out. And so it's kind of the opposite of what we thought we would be bringing in. And our return rates were just the same, if not lower. And so that really gave us that like piloted, soft way of doing it to then take that harder pill to swallow of like, let's just try the fee waves and compare and see what happens. And so that's what we did. And so we had our first fee waive event in 2011. And it was amazing. And I think once you can get to that point where you just try a fee-waived event and you put your all in it, you advertise it, you talk to the media about it, you make sure your volunteers are on board. We talked a lot to our volunteers who were going to be at the event. We made sure our staff was willing to try it and see how it went. The results speak for themselves. So it is amazing for those of you who've worked in animal welfare for a long time to see empty cages in the middle of August. Empty cages in the middle of August. Our whole adoption floor was empty cages. It was just, it was euphoria. It was amazing. And so we also followed up with a lot of the adopters, and we got great pictures and great stories of the matches that we made. Yes, it was mayhem. You have to be prepared for that, and we were. And so it was great, and our return rates were the same, if not lower, from that weekend. And it just gave us room to breathe, and that's what we needed, especially in those summer months where we're just filling up too quickly. And just a reminder, some of you are putting in questions. We're going to take all the questions at the end, so please keep them coming in now so I always forget my questions. So please type them in now, but we're going to wait to answer the questions to the end just so we can make sure we get through most of the content first. So please keep them coming, and we will address them when we get to the end. And so what we've really stuck with since 2011 is a model that's been working great for us. So we have 2 weekend adult cat fee-waived events, so cats 1 year and over. And these are sort of our promotions, our posters, which are super eye-catching, and they've worked really well. They get picked up a lot by the media, and they're beautiful when you're walking around. They make you stop. And so these were done by one of our volunteers, actually, in our Methuen location, and she does a really good job of those. And so we also do, for the entire month of July, we do senior fee waived. So senior to us is 9 and up. And again, we've started to become really fun. Like I think I look forward to our meetings of that group that we put together for our adoption promotions the most out of my week because we get to come up with things like this. So we changed it to Adopt a Classic. We wanted to come up with a way to advertise our senior cats. So we use classic movie posters and take a cat twist on them. So it's really fun. So Sound of Meowstic, Casablanca, The Cat Father. Those are our sort of ways to get picked up by the media as well and get people excited about the event. And they've made an impact. So you can look at our cat adoption percentage by year, and you can see the difference between 2008 to 2016. It's quite significant, especially when you look at the differences between 2008 to 2010. And our senior cat adoptions are even more of a dramatic increase. And I think, when you get to where you're adopting out your 1 to 8 year olds pretty easily, you also can draw more attention to those senior cats. So our percentage has gone way up for the percentage of cats that we're adopting out, but also the numbers have gone way up. So you can see the difference there between 2008 and 2016.
So this next slide is just a little highlight to one of the animals that we adopted out, and I think it's important, that we tell this through to donors and people who are interested, not just the stats, but also the animals that are behind the stats. So Boots is one that was particularly exciting for me. Boots came to us. He was an 18-year-old cat, and prior to these adoption events, we had kind of a glass ceiling of 12 years of age was about the highest age we were going to go to that we thought was reasonable for people to come in and adopt. Otherwise, they just weren't going to get adopted. They were going to stay in a cage, taking up a cage for a long period of time, and we may end up having to euthanize them anyway when younger, more adoptable cats came in. But as we started to get to the point where we started moving our cats more quickly and we had that moment to breathe, like Bryn said, we actually had an opportunity to start looking at the cats that we maybe didn't have a chance to help before. And Boots is the one that sticks into my mind. He was 18 years old when he came in. He was thin, he had bad teeth, but he was really a happy cat. We determined that he was in early stages of renal insufficiency and he was hyperthyroid. And we thought, this is a long shot, guys. We'll try it, but, I don't think anyone's going to come in and adopt a cat that's starting with kidney failure and hyperthyroid. But basically, we were able to do the dental in-house. We started the treatment for hyperthyroid, and he was adopted 3 weeks later. And what we learned from that is people who adopted him, they didn't come in looking for a cat at all. They came in, they were stopping by maybe to drop off donations, I'm not sure. They happened to see this cat, She had been a previous vet tech, and she saw this 18-year-old cat in a cage, and she was inspired to adopt this cat. He was gone within 3 weeks. Now, prior to the clearing some of those animals out, we would have assumed that this cat would have been here for years. So it was great to hear that people were coming in, great to see that people were coming in and they were taking these animals home that we previously thought when we had lots of cats weren't adoptable at all.
So now we had some breathing room, especially in our summer months, because we were getting out the animals quickly. And those bottlenecks that I think we all face where you keep getting cats into your receiving areas, but not being able to move up onto the adoption floor because your cats are sitting on your adoption floor. We were past that now, and so we were able to take a breath in and start looking at, all right, how do we reduce the number of cats coming into us? And again, we felt strongly, we believed in being an open admission, always being there to take an animal in, not sitting on a waiting list as an organization. And so we wanted to look at how can we reduce it through reducing the number of animals in our community. And so I'm going to briefly go over these just because we wanted to focus on small changes that you can implement. And it did take a bit of work. We raised funds initially through grants, and then again our catficates really stepped up. And as we lower the number of animals that are available at those adoption events, we start to be able to transition more of the catficates funding into spay-neuter, which has helped because some of our grants have not been fulfilled in the last couple of years. So we looked at reducing intake, and we wanted to be strategic about it. So we looked at, where are animals coming to us from? And it was amazing when you look at your zip codes, which I'm sure many of you have done. A majority of the cats were coming from a few zip codes, not even from a few towns, but a few zip codes. So we started focusing on those zip codes. And, when you're asking someone to not only bring the cat to you to get it spayed or neutered, but also shell out $70 to $150 for that spay and neuter, that's a lot for that person who's living paycheck to paycheck and has kids to deal with as well. So we found the $10 mark to be what's doable for people. So that's where we started. And so we pretty much doubled the number of cats that we spayed and neutered, and that was really done through demand. So when you start advertising $10 cat spay neuter, the owners come. And so we didn't hire another vet. We really just became as efficient in spaying and neutering as we possibly could to meet that demand. And you can see the impact that had on our kitten intake as well, and our total cat intake as well. So not just our spay-neuter programs, but I think the spay-neuter has the most direct effect on your intake levels. And if you can be strategic about where you offer those promotions to, we know everybody in those zip codes, almost everybody, needs that $10 discounted rate. And then this is just, I'm going through these quickly, I'm sorry. These are the targeted cities that we worked with, and so you could just see how much of an impact they had on those towns. So for Boston, we did Roxbury and Dorchester, and you can see the first three bars are 2008, and then the last two are 2015 and 2016. So the blue is our spay-neuter. You can see how much we increased those in those cities, towns, and the orange is intake, and the gray is euthanasia. So we're down to 6 euthanasias when we were at a lot higher than that. And the Lawrence and Haverhill, those are the targeted towns around our Methuen shelter. So those were huge, and intake really drives euthanasia, and we saw that big time here.
So once we got past the whole, we're taking in lots of cats, placing as many as we can and euthanizing the rest, and we moved into strategically adopting out as many cats as possible, as well as reducing our intake through spay-neuter, we started to move into this other stage, which is, okay, the cats that we actually have left are no longer just everyone competing against the number of kittens that we have, young adult cats that are healthy and friendly, and we were left with this pool of cats that, quite frankly, we used to euthanize without even really thinking about it because we had so many other cats to deal with, and now we were at the point where we could say, maybe these cats are placeable. This is a big topic, and I'm not sure that we'll have enough time to do all of them justice, but I'll go through as many as I can and really try to focus on the important ones. So the first part of it, really just the basics, part of placing difficult-to-place cats was to get the right amount of information on them. When we were looking at cats that were house oiling or biting and scratching, we were not necessarily doing them justice because we were taking in small amounts of information on them just because we were taking in so many and we couldn't give each and every one of them the time that they needed to get a full profile. Or we'd have the owner fill it out and we would just process the animal. So our staff actually sits down and really dives into this cat. What we wanted to walk away from is we want to know this cat the best we possibly can from the owner's perspective. We didn't want to know the cat just from a cage perspective, and that was important. Once the cat was in a cage, we had to realize some of them act really crazy once they're in cages, even if they're wonderful when we see them with their owners. And in fact, we were starting to see that some of these cats that were so terrible that were being dropped off for spay-neuter, we couldn't get them back out of their cages when the owner came to pick them up. We had the owner come back and do that for us, and the cat would just start purring and rubbing up against them. So we started to realize maybe we needed to do something different with our caging. So we started using the portals, making the cages bigger and more comfortable for the animal, making sure that everything was focused on making sure that cats had the best possible transition into the shelter it possibly can. One of the other things that was really hard for our culture with our staff was to make sure that we started looking at individual animals as individuals. Many cats sound the same. You know, 2 12-year-old cats with hyperthyroid and renal insufficiency, they may sound the same on paper, but they're very much individual animals. And we had to get out of that loop of, well, we euthanize this cat, so we should also euthanize this cat that looks the same on paper. We started to look at them as individuals and give them more opportunities that way. And we also started to have to realize that sometimes the best owners for these cats were where they came from. So when they're not being successful in the shelter, sometimes we just needed to call them back. And quite frankly, what we learned is that once our staff started working with clients for spay-neuter, and our adoption staff helped with that as well, we started to realize that the people that were in our community, like Lawrence, for instance, we used to think were bad cat owners because the only relationship we had with them was when they surrendered the animals to us. So we just knew them as people who give up their animals and don't care about their animals. And we started to look at them when we were helping them with spay-neuter is that these are wonderful cat owners that just might not necessarily have the resources necessary to make things be successful. And maybe that was our job now. And so we started to look at it just from the SATs. When the SATs, you fill out your name and you get 300 points. So we started to give people 300 points just for walking into our shelter to adopt an animal and start that conversation from a leg up from them instead of looking at them suspiciously. And that really opened the doors towards placing more animals effectively. So working with difficult-to-place cats, really the important takeaways for this is know your strengths and weaknesses. We know that our shelter is very, very busy, and so shy cats don't necessarily move quickly through our building, but they do work really well for other rescues that have a quieter place or a smaller shelter. And we had to start to stay within our limits of what we knew we could do and do well and have other places help us out with the ones that we couldn't do well. And in exchange, we could take some of their more placeable cats because we had great walk-through opportunities for adoption, and our foot traffic was great where their rescues were homes, and we were able to place their cats. So we sort of started to trade off and work with each other, not just the big shelter gives to the small shelter, but we give back and forth so we can maximize the best opportunities for the cats, no matter where that location was. That took some convincing on our part, but once we got to that point, we really worked together as a community for cats, started to look less like the number of animals that come into our shelter are our responsibility, but really the number of cats that are in our community are shared responsibility through all the groups that are there. So marketing our difficult-to-place cats, we really had to train our staff not to just sort of quickly filter people through and hit them with the worst stuff first just to see if they could bear the brunt of that punch and if they were still interested. We actually had to start training staff just to actually start with the best qualities of the cat rather than their issues that they were dealing with. So we would talk about Boots being incredibly affectionate instead of Boots having hyperthyroid issue and renal insufficiency. And that made people listen a little bit longer, and we were able to have a better conversation with them overall. And we also had to kind of change some of our terminology. We were often using terms in our shelter that didn't necessarily translate to the public, like high arousal, which, you know, for a feisty, I'm using it now to explain it, but feisty and high arousal for teenage cats that like to hunt and bite, that didn't necessarily mean anything to anybody. We actually had to describe the behavior and what they would need to do to make that be successful, and that made a big difference. And ultimately, we started to realize that we had to invest more marketing in the animals that have been there the longest. So we implemented some plans with our volunteers to say, hey, when a cat hits 3 weeks in the shelter, let's start changing things for that cat. Let's start ramping up the expectations for the public. Let's get them on social media. Let's make their cage cards better. Let's find their positive attributes and really sing those praises. And we focus on the cats that got stuck there rather than just all the cats, because some of the cats didn't need much help to get adopted. And we really recommend using video. We know these cats really well, but taking one still photo doesn't necessarily do the job. And sometimes even the still photos we were taking really showed a not very friendly cat. So why would anyone come in to adopt a all-black cat with its ears pinned to the back, huddled in the corner of a cage? Why don't we have them interact with the people that are caring for them and snap some real live photos? Like you see in this photo here with the cat kissing the nose of one of our volunteers. Who wouldn't want to adopt that cat? But who would want to adopt that cat if it was just a picture of her in her cage, huddled in the corner? So we started to do a lot of discussion about who our difficult-to-place cats are. And obviously these are probably the same for everybody. They're cats with medical issues, feline leukemia, senior cats, chronic illness, hospice cats. Hospice cats we never even thought we could have any opportunity with, but once we started getting our space under control, we started to help all these cats. Cats with behavior issues, house soiling, biting, scratching, shy and fearful. And we started to work with all of these cats as quickly as we possibly could. Working with medical conditions is pretty clear, I think, for the most part. What was most important for us is that we were able to write clear medical records for the adopters in a way that they could read it. So we had to get our vets trained to actually translate vet speak into human speak and get them to the point where they actually could understand them. Set clear post-adoption plans so they knew where the responsibility lied, whether it was with us as follow-up or on their own with their veterinarian. And remove some of the cost barriers. So if we did start to see some issues that might make it hard to adopt those animals, maybe we should waive the adoption fees so they can spend the money on the medical care. And put some of these animals into foster care if they needed more close monitoring, like diabetic cats. So what we were looking at next were shy and fearful cats. Shy and fearful cats really need some time and some space to be able to figure out who they really are. So you can see from this picture in the cage, this is the cat that's huddled in the corner, and this is a cat that's not happy in their cage. But this cat might have had a great profile from its owner, and we were seeing completely opposite stuff. So we had to recognize that they were going to move a little bit slower through our building, and we needed to give them the time necessary for it. And now we could, because we didn't have as many cats coming in. We could consider foster, but sometimes that's hard to do because the cat's great in foster, but to bring him back to meet somebody at the shelter, that may be hard to see that same wonderful cat that foster is seeing. And we had to maybe give some spaces for them to hide in their cages. We had to recognize that we probably bond with a smaller number of staff, and maybe it wasn't best just to have everybody try to handle them. And some of our shy and fearful cats, we recognized that some of these cats just needed to be out of cages altogether and into office spaces as well. We started to think, we were told from the very beginning, I know I was when I started in 1994, that the very worst thing that we could do is when an owner said that they would like to come and visit their animal, that we told them absolutely not, because it would be heartbreaking for the animal to see that person again and experience the loss of that person over and over again. But we started to realize maybe that's actually not the case anymore. Maybe they could actually help us with that process. We were seeing them be friendly when they were picked up from spay and neuter, when they were previously mean to us. So maybe we just needed to try and challenge that expectation of not having them visit. Okay, so the next thing is just going to be a video of a little bit about that. I think this is the video that's coming up. So what I'm going to show you is exactly an example of that cat. A cat who was extremely angry at us in a cage to the point where we had to net this cat to try an office space, and in the office space wasn't much happier. We called the owner in to spend some time with the cat, and the results were pretty impressive. And then we also videotaped the cat the day after the person left. So we looked at this and from a couple of different ways. I'll have you guys see this video. It's pretty short.
Descartes. He was like,
as you can see, this cat's
I love you so much.
less angry than we met him in the cage, but his full hackles are up. As you can hear the video, he's growling.
So hard.
Here he is the minute the owner walked in the door.
I feel so bad.
Just headbutting headbutting like crazy, just absolutely ecstatic to see his person.
How amazing you are.
And every single staff member came into the office to see if he would do the same with them, and he did. He was friendly with everybody at that point.
My voice.
But we wondered whether this would actually extend out once the person left again, or would they go through that heartbreak that we expected to see happen. Here he is the next day, so you can see that he's still not psyched, but he just one day after, we're able to actually touch this cat for the very first time in the time he's been in our care. He's not psyched about everything, but the volume has turned down significantly on this cat. And the best part about this whole story is we invited the owner to come in, and the reason why she surrendered was because she was traveling a lot. She knew her cat did not transition well, and she didn't want to put him through the stress of all the moves she may have to do for her new job. But when she was there and she saw how sad the cat was and how angry the cat was, she made a phone call, teary-eyed, to her new bosses and said, "My cat's really suffering in the shelter." And they said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of you. We're going to move you immediately to a hotel that allows cats, and we're going to help you find housing for this cat so you guys can stay together." Now, that's not an expectation that would happen for everybody. Obviously, that's pretty amazing. But the cat went back to her the very next day. And what it means to me is that we did something different than we had been told was okay to do, and the results were different than we expected. And now we challenge ourselves to be able to do those whenever we get stuck with a cat that we think has the potential to get adopted. In addition to that, we get some cats that people can't actually come down and spend time with, but are shy and fearful. And what we found is that we were putting these cats in offices, and that we were hoping that people would ask about them, and we put posters up in the lobby or on our front counter when people to come to visit, but nobody ever asked about these cats. But actually what happened is we started to think, you know what, people aren't seeing the posters on the walls in the lobby because that's not where the cats are. The cats are in the cat room, and that's where people go to see the cats. But now we have these empty cages, so how do we change these things all around? Instead of putting these posters on the wall of these cats, we did these 3D cutouts of them, and we set them up in a cage just like any other cat. They had food, water, and litter, and we basically made them look like real cats. But when people were surprised that they were cardboard cutouts, sometimes a little bit shocked, we would say, "Oh, do you want to meet this cat? It's right in our office. Let's come and see this cat together." Both of these cats had been in our offices for months, not getting adopted. We put the cardboard cutouts out. The one on the right got adopted within 3 days. The one on the left somehow ended up at my house and is now my cat. So it worked out in a couple different ways. Litter box issues, I know this is a big topic, and so I'm going to make it as brief as I possibly can. The most important thing you can do is figure out what the issue is, and primarily what I'll tell you from what we've learned is that occasionally it's medical issues, but primarily it's stress-related. Something in the home is stressing this animal out, and they are unhappy, and so they are peeing. Cats pee on stuff, and what we've been told from many behaviorists, they pee on things because it makes them feel less stressed out, because it smells more like them, because cats are weird. And what we learned is that sometimes the easiest thing to do with placing cats with litter box issues was basically to not try to figure out how they were doing in the shelter, but just find them a new home that didn't have the stress factors. The fact that cats use a litter box in the shelter and didn't mean anything, and we were getting stuck on that. So we had to retrain ourselves to that. So ultimately, we had to basically find them homes that were stress-free, and the simplest thing that we can do is send them to a home where there's no other cats, no other dogs, or really tiny young kids that might stress them out, and basically see how they did. And what we found is that we place these cats constantly, and they all are successful for the most part. Adopters just really need to be well informed about the issues. They need to be told why this thing might be happening, and that they might need to try a few different things to make sure it works in their home. And when we give them the adult choices to decide whether they want to take that challenge on or not, we found that people do, and we did not expect that at all. Biting and scratching, I think, is just a little bit more challenging at times, but basically one of the things that was important to us is that we got them into spaces where they didn't get onto scratch quarantines. So we locked them behind glass doors in colony rooms that used to be filled with 25 cats, but when we didn't have as many cats, we could give it to a feisty young cat to play in, but we could lock the door so people didn't get scratched by saying hello by accident. And some part of this, we just had to embrace their catitude and recognize that they are feisty cats that might bite, and they just need people who don't really care about that, or that maybe they bite so much that we make them into a working cat. And for the working cat, what we really need is barn cats primarily. Really easy for us at Devon's Farm. We have all sorts of farm adopters that are coming in to adopt horses, and they often want barn cats. So it makes it easy for us, but for the most part, as long as you advertise that you have a barn cat program, people will come looking for them. And ultimately, the cats that were really over-aroused had long-term litter box issues, great candidates. So we were able to get those cats into those spaces. And we avoid things like fearful cats or cats with medical issues because they're not what people want for barn cats. And basically, all we need from barn cats is that they provide these basic things that any other cat adopter would, and we guide them along the process for that. And we're coming up to our last slides here, so I know we're running low on time. But all of these efforts have really meant this for us. We went from, in 2008 through 2010, euthanizing thousands of cats in our adoption centers. We spent all day euthanizing cats sometimes. And by just applying some thoughtful approach to it, some creative energy, and just a determination to make things better, we were able to reduce our euthanasia down to just over 300 cats this past year for all 3 of our adoption centers, which we never thought would be the result. And when we looked at those cats and who we were euthanizing, they were cats that probably couldn't be placed no matter what. So we're still drilling down and trying to get that number down to as close to 0 as possible. But it's been an amazing change for us and an inspiration to keep going forward and trying to move on to where our future is and what our next stages are. So I think that's the end of our slides, and want to make sure we have some time for questions.
Thank you so much, Mike and Bryn. That was great. So inspiring. Let's move on to some questions here. We've got quite a few, and we'll get through as many as we can. The first one is, how did you define and communicate what is an emergency surrender when you made that change?
Yeah, well, an emergency surrender is really what the person believes is an emergency. And so we had to take them at their face value, and that if someone was desperate, we didn't want to have them make desperate decisions. And so, if they call on the phone ahead of time, we kind of define an emergency as maybe house burned down, they're losing housing, or things on those lines. But most of those times, those people just showed up. And if it was an emergency to them, we just dealt with it. But part of the thing that we did here is to be able to reduce the number of surrenders on the weekends. Is all we had to do was start telling people in as many ways that we possibly can. On our website, the hours are listed and surrender hours are listed. Every time we take a phone call, we tell people about our hours and we work through it. So if you can catch them ahead of time, you can reduce the amount of intakes on your weekends altogether. And quite frankly, the number of cats being surrendered to us on weekends is really manageable. So it's not that big of a deal to us anymore.
Okay, great. The next question up is, what types of resources do you provide to cat owners or adopters to help keep cats in their homes in the first place, or help new adopters successfully integrate their new cat?
Well, I'll take a stab at the first part of it, which is how do we keep cats in their homes, is we really just ask them what they need. Sometimes when people come to our door and they're surrendering their animal, we may not necessarily be able to, even if we can find a pathway for them to keep their animal, they may have mentally made that decision, and we don't try to force that issue. As one of my colleagues always says, surrender is something that is a service that we offer, so we can't get mad when people take advantage of that. So, but when we do get them on the phone and we're able to talk to them in advance, we can start problem solving before they get to the point where we make that final decision to surrender, and we have much more success with that. And as far as integrating into the new home, I think Bryn could maybe speak to this too, but ultimately we base everything that we do for adoptions off of a conversation rather than an application and approval process. What we want to do is just start that conversation with people, talk with them as if they're cat experts as well, try to get a sense of what they need and what their concerns are, and address those from our level of experience that we have, rather than just reading and flipping through a book that we read to everybody. We start that conversation and we let it go wherever it needs to help them with what they feel like they need help with.
Yeah, I would add to that, like with the more difficult to place cats that we're working in. So if they do have a litter box issue in the past, then we'll counsel them specifically on what that litter box issue was and decreasing stress from that transition, because a lot of times the transition can be stressful for cats. And for shy cats, we always recommend, if they can, starting in one room and then slowly opening up the space. But we also talk to them about, okay, what's your living situation? What would work for you, instead of telling them what to do, and that helps a lot, because then they feel empowered, and that they can work with the animal in their situation.
Okay, and getting back to the potential surrender, do you allow cats to be adopted directly from the adopter, or do you encourage that?
Do you mean from the surrender, I assume, or?
Yes, I think so. I think that's.
Yeah, so we haven't gotten to that stage. We have some ideas on how we might do that, where we invite people in to adopt their own cats out instead of us doing it. But, speaking of this, and going back to the video that I showed you of adopters coming in, one of the things that we recently did is that there was an older woman who was moving into senior housing. She had to surrender her cat. She was incredibly upset about the whole process, and the cat was really having a hard time. We got the cat into the office, and it was making small headways with the person that worked in that office. What we did is we actually had her come down several times to get the cat basically connected to that one office staff member, which worked. But she was such a loving and wonderful person, and we felt so bad for her situation that when we started to get adoption inquiries, we invited her to come down and work with the adopter directly. And we just sort of stood back and did the paperwork, but we let her tell all about the cat that she knew way better than we did. And we had that surrender person basically do the adoption. And that was, again, mind-blowing for us, because we were told this shouldn't happen, and here it is working so great for lots of different cats.
That's great. I want to ask you about if there's anything that you tried that didn't work at all three locations, or worked great at one and didn't work great at the other two, and how did you handle that?
Well, our Cape shelter is much smaller and doesn't have the infrastructure to be as successful as us. And what I mean by that is they have a really tiny cat room. Luckily, it's getting rebuilt into a new shelter, which we're excited about. But it's really hard to get people parked at that location. It's hard to get people into the cat room in any volume. So those events where they draw in so much interest are really hard to navigate through such a small space. So what we recognize is that our adoption events is that one of the other ways that we might be able to help our Cape shelter get to a more normal status is our Boston and Methuen locations are basically adopting out every cat, which means we all of a sudden had space in Boston and Methuen. And if the Cape didn't have that same success, we could take some of their cats to get them down to a much smaller amount and let them have space to rebound when new surrenders came in. So even if it doesn't work at one location, we can still support each other and have it work organizationally.
Okay. The next question up is, besides cat portals, what other low-cost stress relief techniques have you tried for the cats at your shelters?
So the portals were amazing, and that's one of those changes that seems like it would be tough, but I think it cost us like maybe $1,000, and it makes such a huge difference for the cat's well-being, especially those cats that might be shyer and they do better in our receiving areas. So I know everyone's set up a little bit differently, but our receiving areas aren't open to the public, but just to volunteers. And so we can kind of, it's a less stressful environment for some of those shyer cats, which has helped. And then, our offices have been huge, and our fosters have been huge. We do use Seal Away, and we did a small study on whether it's working, and I think the jury's still out, but it doesn't hurt. Were you going to say something too, Mike?
Well, and even just like if you don't have different spaces to work with, just setting up your cage the right way, just providing them a hiding spot right off the bat. We have a little shelf that's built into the cages, and we set up our new cages in holding with just having a towel draped over that so that they have a space to hide behind if they need to. So you can make little tiny changes to make even, a dated or older shelter more comfortable for the animal.
We also utilize our volunteers, too. So we have a cat comforter program at the Boston shelter. So it's kind of a third tier. With our dogs, we have different levels of training to work with different levels of dogs. And we've kind of started the same thing in Boston. And so those shy cat comforters spend, an hour with that cat that's at the shelter, trying to make their life a little bit better. Oftentimes we're seeing those are the cats that aren't eating well, they're losing their appetite because of stress. And so the time that the volunteers have spent with them and the knowledge that we gain from them is really great. So we have an email group, and they email that group, which includes our vet and some of our adoption counselors and myself, so we can get, a view of if that cat's improving, if it's not improving, and then prioritize which cats go into different areas if they need to. And that's been huge. It's made a big difference on the adoptability of some of our cats as well. And a lot of those volunteers are also what we call cat monitors that interface with the public. And so that's a good way, you have someone on the adoption floor, the cat's not on the adoption floor, but they can talk about that cat and bring that person back to that cat. So that's worked well for us, too.
One last thing I'll add to it, too, is one of the things I did recently is I went through our cat adoption room and threw away every single brush I could find. And I called it the game of combs. And I threw away all of the brushes because what we were finding is that our volunteers, though well-meaning, were brushing those cats that are kind of feisty or shy or cranky that we're now trying to place, and they were getting them worked up and either getting bit by them or they were biting the first adopter that came through the door. So we armed them all instead of with brushes with wand toys and let them, interact with them, but with hands off, so those feisty cats could get some exercise rather than getting stimulated.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the portalization process? You said it was affordable. How long did it take? How did you go about it?
Yeah, it took, so we were hoping our maintenance team would do it because we do have, we're a bigger building since we share the building with the hospital here in Boston, so we were hoping to have maintenance do it, but they wanted someone else to actually cut the holes, and so we did hire a company, and like I said, I think it was $1,000, and they only did part of it, and then the maintenance team finished the rest. The maintenance team is two wonderful men that are on site that actually placed the portals in. So it took, I think they started in the afternoon and they finished the afternoon of the next day. And so you want to do it at a slower time of year if you have that, and we're lucky enough to have that in New England. But it didn't impact us too much. And we did do almost the whole receiving area. So we knew that in advance and did it during a slower time, but I think it took 24 hours to complete. So it didn't take long at all.
Okay, thanks. We have time for just a couple more questions. Let's try this one. What conversation tips would you suggest when discussing FELV with an adopter?
I think what we try to do is not just necessarily be the only one sharing information in those situations. So because it's a big decision for people and may be something that could be hard to understand initially, we're happy to do adoption pendings for people. We'll get if they're interested in it, but we usually get them a little bit of time to think about it, but we arm them with the medical history that we have. We encourage them to talk to their vet and other people that they may trust about making that decision, just to take the night to think about it, make sure that it's okay. And we often find that once people feel fully informed, that they come right back and they adopt the cat.
Great. Okay, next question is, did you encounter resistance from the community in regards to spaying or neutering cats? And if yes, how did you combat that?
No, I think the community was psyched. To tell you a little bit, just really briefly about why we did it at $10, what we were finding from the other low-cost spay-neuter groups that were out there was that the male cats were not coming to their clinics, and they didn't know why that was. And so we did this month-long adventure, of which we just decided in one of our slower months to take all of the rules off. So we invited anybody with male cats that needed to have their cats neutered to come in. They would charge them $10 in cash when they came in. We didn't make any appointments, and we basically just decided we would do as many male cats as we could in a month. The result was overwhelmingly positive, and we did something like 565 male cats in that month, and that set our strategy for $10 being the price point, because what we were learning from the community is that people cared about the cats, but they might not necessarily consider them their cats if they see them outside or that they showed up on their doorstep, and spending $100 that they didn't have on that particular cat wasn't reasonable, but they would spend $10. And it made it affordable for them, accessible, and it was embraced really well. We didn't meet any resistance, and in fact, the vet community embraced it. And in Methuen, some of our best referring places to our spay-neuter programs are local vets in our area who have their clients come in for vaccinations, exams, And when they inquire about spay-neuter, they give them our flyer, sign them up, and tell them to take the lower-cost spay-neuter and keep coming back to them for ongoing medical care.
Great. Okay, well, it looks like we're right at 1 o'clock, so why don't we wrap this up? I want to thank you, Mike and Bryn, and thank you to all our participating Challenger shelters. If your shelter isn't already in the challenge and has the desire to save even just one more feline life, we welcome you to join us. To register, visit www.millioncatchallenge.org. If you have any questions, we are always here to help. You can reach us at info@millioncatchallenge.org. Thanks again for taking time out of your busy day to be here, and have a great day.